But, that was a time in my life when I was yes, sir, no, sir, how high can I jump, sir? And you sit there and you go, I have really strong thoughts and opinions on a creative matter. And, someone else on another movie I remember made a creative decision. I thought, wow, that's a nail in a coffin that I alone will lie in. and it's true. I mean, they don't say this producer's movie flopped or this director's. That's me. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to be on that headline, I'd like to be the architect of my own demise.
Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' obscene demands to Wayfair have now surfaced in the most explosive way possible. Recorded calls. Yes, actual recordings. Remember that whole messy kerfuffle around the film premiere? Blake allegedly ordering everyone to unfollow Baldoni, forcing him to attend his own premiere solo, banning him from the red carpet, and pressuring the entire cast to cut him off? Well, now it turns out Ryan was also roaming around Hollywood, running his mouth to anyone who would listen, including his agents at WME, and allegedly using both WME and Sony to strong-arm Baldoni and Wayfair into backing down. And here's where it gets wild. Jamie Heath has admitted these phone calls exist. He recorded conversations not just with WME, who represented Ryan, Blake, Baldoni, and Wayfair at the time, but also with Sony. The existence of these recordings was quietly slipped into an exhibit filed in court yesterday. Wayfair had to respond to Blake Lively's motion for sanctions, where she accused them of spoliation, meaning she claimed they deleted evidence. She demanded extreme sanctions, including blocking Wayfair from arguing that there was never a smear campaign. Wayfair responded with a 30-page takedown and attached around 60 documents to back up their claims. And while no one knows how the judge will rule, the way Lively framed her accusations doesn't seem to provide much proof of intentional deletion. Wayfair's team broke down why nothing was intentionally destroyed, pointed out that Blake isn't prejudiced because she already claims to have mountains of evidence, and highlighted their own evidence showing that Blake herself fueled her own PR downfall. They emphasized that she generated the bad press, she chose to market alcohol, she excluded Baldoni from the premiere, and her decisions set the scandal in motion. They even call out how Blake claims she saw a spike in negative press on August 6th, before Wayfair even had Jed Wallace on contract. So how could he have orchestrated a smear campaign on a day he didn't even work there? And how would one PR contractor turn the entire internet against her in 48 hours? It's impossible, and Wayfair argues exactly that. But the real bombshell? The evidence they attached. Messages and exchanges with WME revealing that Blake caused internal chaos behind the scenes, so much chaos that Wayfair had to hire crisis PR. And according to Jaime G's own testimony, he openly admitted he recorded his call with WME. Danny Greenberg comes up again in the filings, and his testimony is jaw-dropping. He explained that after a call with Patrick, he got another call, possibly with both Patrick and Danny present, though he couldn't fully recall, and that Danny wanted to read him a letter written by the Reynolds. Yes, both of them. Danny said he couldn't believe what was happening, so he hit record. He wanted the whole thing documented, especially because the letter was being dictated over the phone and he didn't have a hard copy to reference. This was the infamous August 12th statement, the one demanding that Wayfair publicly admit they weren't man enough, that there were problems on set, and that everything was allegedly their fault. According to his deposition with Stephanie Jones, he recorded the call specifically because Blake and Ryan were pressuring them to take the fall, and that recording still exists. When asked about the Sony marketing call, Danny explained that they had been strategizing around the logistics of the two different premieres, how it would look, how to handle the optics, all of that. Wayfair thought they had a strong relationship with Sony, but during this call, something shifted. Danny said it suddenly felt like Sony was playing middleman or leaning toward a side they weren't openly admitting to. We don't have the next page of his testimony, but the implication is obvious. Sony may have begun siding with Blake Lively because Blake and Ryan carry far more Hollywood weight than Wayfair ever could. And here's where Wayfair gets almost too polite. In their filings, they generously call Blake Lively A-list. Let's be honest, Blake barely scrapes A-list status on her own. Her proximity to Ryan is what pushes her into that conversation. Meanwhile, Ryan genuinely had A-list leverage at the time because of Deadpool. He was one of the highest-paid actors in 2024, second only to The Rock, and Deadpool and Wolverine crossed the billion-dollar mark. His A-list status is directly tied to Marvel. None of his other films have ever come close to that level of success. That's the real source of his power. Blake's power is borrowed by association, through him, and through her friendship halo with real A-listers like Taylor Swift. So when Sony begins shifting its weight, it's not because Blake dominates Hollywood, it's because Ryan does, and studios worship the money he generates. Wayfair points out that Sony essentially hung them out to dry, and the irony is brutal. Wayfair had been developing this project for years before Sony was even involved. Sony didn't step in until 2022, 3 years after Wayfair acquired the IP, paid for it themselves, and worked through multiple drafts. Sony never owned the intellectual property, yet once filming began and once Lively and Reynolds started throwing their influence around, Sony chose the side with more industry clout, leaving Wayfair exposed. Once Sony stepped in as the distributor, everything changed. Because Sony would be the one getting the film into theaters, they began pushing their own agenda, demanding that Wayfair hire Blake, make certain creative changes, and essentially reshape the film to suit Blake and Ryan. The irony is that Wayfair paid the bulk of the budget. They funded nearly the entire $30 million production, yet Sony behaved as if they owned the movie. If this happened in any other industry, it would be called what it is: theft, coercion, fraud, extortion. Sony did this because they were desperate. The company was in chaos, executives being fired left and right, including the Sony Pictures CEO and major players involved with this project. Sony had suffered 2 huge box office flops that year, losing $71 million, and they needed a significant media hit, and Wayfair was their holy grail. But they finally did. It bombed so hard that the studio lost $50 million. Blake was, by every metric, box office poison. Yet Sony still put their money on Blake and Ryan, 2 actors known for power struggles, over the people who actually financed the project. Sony pressured Wayfair to hire Blake, and when she was in, Sony allowed her to hijack the film completely. In Wayfair's motion, they wrote that during the second phase of production, quote, Lively moved to seize control of production, end quote. She took over editing, post-production, and marketing, control that rightfully belonged to Baldoni and Wayfair. Wayfair states plainly that she ultimately gained full control of post-production. They attach multiple exhibits to prove it: documents from Wayfair, testimony from Danny Greenberg, discovery from Sony, 2 separate Sony exhibits, and Justin Baldoni's deposition. This is crucial because it shows the proof does not rely on Wayfair's word alone. The evidence that Blake systematically pushed Wayfair out of their own film comes from Sony, Blake, Danny Greenberg, and Baldoni himself. Wayfair continues, quote, Lively accomplished her takeover through threats that if her demands were not met, she would not participate in marketing the film, end quote, even though she was contractually obligated to do so. The motion cites evidence from Baldoni and Sony directly, meaning her threats are documented inside corporate records. None of this is speculation. It's on paper. Some of these messages already appear in the amended complaint, where Sony relays Blake's threats. She won't promote, she won't participate, she will withhold marketing unless she gets her way. The evidence shows the conflict was never about harassment. It was about control. Baldoni's own testimony reinforces all of this. He states that Blake demanded Sony remove his, quote, filmed by credit from the movie. She insisted he be excluded from the premiere. She coordinated the mass on following on August 7th. She ensured he could not appear in any publicity with her. Then, Wayfair and Baldoni were shoved into a basement during the premiere, barred from press, photography, or normal red carpet access. And Blake still wonders why crisis PR was needed. This wasn't an accident. It was a takeover. Blake wanted the film to be hers, her narrative, her spotlight, her moment. She didn't want to share credit with the person who developed the story, financed the project, directed the film, and starred in it. Wayfair's motion ends with the clearest summary of all. Quote, not content with usurping Baldoni's role as director and excluding him from marketing of the film he developed, financed, directed, and starred in, quote, she then sidelined, indeed banished him from the premiere, refusing to be photographed with him at all." End quote. Wayfair's motion gets even more brutal. They say Blake refused to be photographed with Baldoni at the premiere and demanded that he and his guests be hidden from sight, shoved into a separate screening room. They have evidence from this from WME, from Jamie Heath's deposition, from Steve Sarawitz's deposition, and from Wayfair's own internal records. Baldoni was also barred from appearing with Blake in any publicity photos or promotional events. And then there's the unfollowing. Lively publicly unfollowed Baldoni, and Wayfair has evidence of what Blake told people about why she did it. That evidence comes from Colleen Hoover herself. Yes, the author provided testimony about Blake's behind-the-scenes narrative regarding the unfollowing. The filing explains that the PR chaos that followed, the surge of negative chatter, the rumors about discord on set that hit the media on August 6th, was fueled by information sourced to Sony, plus Blake's unfollowing of Baldoni, plus her insistence that his filmed by Justin Baldoni credit be stripped from the movie he developed, sold, directed, and starred in. Additional actions she took are redacted, but the evidence for them comes from WME and Sony directly. Then Wayfair fires the shot that ties everything together: Blake's alcohol marketing. They note that given alcohol's role in domestic violence cases, Blake's decision to promote her Betty Buzz and Betty Booze drinks using products like Riley Waite and It Ends With Booze at events tied to a film about domestic abuse was catastrophic. The public backlash was instantaneous and vicious. They even cite a New York Times article documenting the outrage. Wayfair writes that because of Blake's conduct and her escalating hostility, they were genuinely concerned about a looming PR disaster. That is why they hired crisis manager Melissa Nathan. And the point of all of this becomes clear. This is why Wayfair didn't file a motion to dismiss. If they had tried to dismiss the case early, they would never have obtained any of this evidence. They wouldn't have gotten discovery from Sony. They wouldn't have gotten discovery from WME. They wouldn't have been able to depose anyone. All of that only happened because they allowed the case to move forward, and now they have the receipts. Meanwhile, Blake and Ryan's evidence is under seal until December 19th, after the judge granted them an extension. But the judge has publicly stated he will not rule on summary judgment until everything is unsealed because the public has a right to see what is happening in a publicly funded court. In other words, transparency wins. We will see everything. They just bought themselves a little time. And the lengths they're going to seal simple statements, descriptions, and factual discussions is bizarre. Think about it. The Justice Department, yes, the same Justice Department currently litigating the unsealing of Epstein documents, has allowed more damaging material to remain public than what Blake and Ryan are trying to hide here. What is unsealed in the Epstein files is more damning than anything in Justin Baldoni's text messages with Blake. Yet Blake and Ryan are trying to bury even basic communications.